What if the future of surveillance wasn't something you could see or even sense? Not drones in the sky or cameras on poles, but particles, microscopic, invisible, designed to float through the air, settle on your skin, and track you without your knowledge. It sounds like science fiction, but it's not. It's a real project, funded, developed, and deployed. It's called Smart Dust. The concept began in the early 1990s, not in a classified facility, but at a university. At the University of California, Berkeley, a group of researchers proposed the creation of tiny sensors capable of performing environmental and structural monitoring. They called them microelectromechanical systems, or MEMS, devices with mechanical parts so small they could only be seen with a microscope. The team was led by Dr. Christopher S.J. Pister, who in 1997 proposed that these sensors could be miniaturized, equipped with wireless communication capabilities, and distributed en masse to create a self-organizing sensor network. This was the true birth of the Smart Dust vision. But it wasn't long before the U.S. government took notice. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, recognized the potential military applications immediately. In DARPA's eyes, Smart Dust wasn't just about monitoring temperature or motion, it was a revolutionary tool for battlefield awareness. Imagine being able to seed an enemy zone with invisible sensors that relay troop movements, detect vehicles, pick up biochemical agents, all in real time. No soldiers, no satellites, just dust. DARPA provided grants and strategic oversight, pushing the limits of what MEMS could become. Their vision was bold: create autonomous sensor motes, no larger than grains of sand, that could measure environmental data, store information, and transmit findings across a mesh network. Each mote would carry its own power supply, typically a micro battery or even a piezoelectric generator that could harvest energy from vibrations or light. They would contain microprocessors, sensors, antennas, and sometimes even cameras or accelerometers, all in a single integrated package. The core technological breakthrough here wasn't just miniaturization, it was distributed intelligence. Each Smart Dust mote wasn't just a passive sensor. It could make decisions, relay data to neighboring motes, and adapt to changing environments. It was swarm logic, surveillance by hive mind. To the military, this meant unprecedented control over the battle space. A battlefield could be seeded with millions of motes launched from aircraft or artillery shells. They would settle on roads, buildings, vehicles, and people, transmitting a live map of the area back to a command center. And because they were so small, they'd be nearly impossible to detect or disable. And this wasn't speculation. DARPA funded extensive research into autonomous distributed sensing throughout the early 2000s. One internal document, declassified in part in 2011, outlines the potential for Smart Dust to be used in urban monitoring, counterinsurgency, and target tagging. The ability to paint a high-value individual with dust motes that continue to transmit his location, even if he changes clothes or disappears into a crowd. Simultaneously, academic institutions advance the foundational technology. The University of Michigan, MIT, and Sandia National Laboratories all contributed breakthroughs in MEMS design, miniaturized power systems, and low-power radio communication. Corporate entities soon followed. Companies like Intel, Hewlett-Packard, and even Hitachi began filing patents for microsensors with wireless tracking capabilities. By the mid-2000s, the line between research and application had blurred. Reports surfaced of battlefield deployments of experimental sensor clouds in Iraq and Afghanistan. These were not always dust in the literal sense, but they were test cases. Networks of tiny wireless sensors dropped from UAVs and embedded into infrastructure to monitor insurgent movements, roadside bomb placements, and even human patterns of life. And yet, the public heard almost nothing. Smart dust remained a quiet topic, buried beneath technical jargon and university white papers. It never made headlines, not in the way drones or satellites did. Perhaps because the very idea of smart dust is designed to escape attention. It's not meant to be seen, it's meant to be forgotten until it's already too late. Because here's the part few people understand. Once deployed, these particles don't need maintenance. They don't need handlers. They don't even need visibility. They can sit on your desk, your clothes, your skin, and still transmit. They're watching, and you'll never know. By the early 2010s, smart dust had evolved from a theoretical concept into a working deployable system, at least in prototype form. The key breakthroughs came from materials science. Researchers developed nanoscale transistors, ultra-thin antennas, and flexible substrates that allowed sensors to bend, twist, and fold, perfect for integrating into clothing, structures, and even biological tissue. And the sensors themselves became more advanced. No longer limited to simple measurements like temperature or vibration, these micro devices began to support chemical detection, electromagnetic pulse recognition, and biometric monitoring. Some prototypes could analyze sweat for stress hormones, detect airborne pathogens, or pick up on faint electrical signals emitted by muscles and nerves. The miniaturization of antennas, once a bottleneck in smart dust design, was overcome through the use of microfabricated RF components. Combined with low-power protocols like Zigbee and Bluetooth Low Energy, these motes could now communicate with each other and with collection nodes over surprisingly large distances. But perhaps the most alarming breakthrough came in the form of covert delivery mechanisms. In 2014, leaked documents from a defense contractor suggested the development of smart dust dispersal systems embedded into drones, paint sprays, and HVAC systems. The implication was clear. These sensors could be distributed silently, anonymously, and without leaving a trace. DARPA never confirmed the existence of an operational dispersal system, but several projects under its Information Exploitation Office, such as the SensorWebs and N0 programs, indicated continued investment in distributed autonomous sensing with minimal power draw and environmental permanence. And as the battlefield matured, so did the use cases. In counterinsurgency zones, smart dust motes were reportedly tested to track movement across remote paths, monitor urban corridors, and provide 24/7 surveillance without the need for cameras or satellite overhead. These sensors could be deployed in crowds without alerting individuals. No lights, no heat signatures, no audible hum. Field reports describe zone fogging, where motes were dispersed over a perimeter to detect incoming vehicles, foot traffic, or changes in chemical composition. Operators would then receive alerts about breaches in real time, without ever placing a human asset in danger. But the leap from military to civilian applications was inevitable. As technology costs fell, the private sector took notice. Companies began integrating smart dust concepts into consumer products, infrastructure, and retail environments, though under different names. They called them microsensors, intelligent dust, ambient sensors, or ubiquitous computing nodes. Smart buildings use them to track temperature gradients, air quality, and occupancy rates, ostensibly for efficiency. Hospitals experimented with biosensors that could monitor patients continuously without intrusive wires or wearables. Retail chains began embedding sensors into packaging to track inventory in real time. Logistics firms applied sensor dust to pallets for chain-of-custody tracking. One startup even developed a prototype for smart dust motes that could adhere to clothing fibers, creating mobile data trails of consumer behavior. These developments were marketed as revolutionary, efficient, invisible. But they also raise fundamental questions. Who owns the data? Who is being tracked? And how can you opt out of something you don't even know is there? By 2016, privacy watchdogs began sounding the alarm. The Electronic Frontier Foundation published a white paper on ubiquitous sensing and consumer consent, citing smart dust as a category of technology with no meaningful way to detect or resist once deployed. And they were right. Because smart dust, by design, eludes detection. It doesn't ping your phone. It doesn't show up on your Wi-Fi list. It simply is invisible, persistent, silent, and in a world increasingly built on data extraction, that makes it the ultimate surveillance tool. In healthcare, smart dust promised to revolutionize medicine, if you could live with its implications. By 2017, researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, where the idea first originated, had developed a neural dust prototype, a grain-sized sensor capable of detecting electrical activity inside the body. Implanted near nerves or muscles, these devices could transmit real-time data on organ function, pain signals, or neural responses. They didn't require batteries. Instead, they were powered by ultrasound, harvested from a remote transducer that pulsed energy through tissue. The sensors, in turn, modulated that energy into data and sent it back. It was a breakthrough for chronic disease monitoring. Paralyzed patients could benefit from non-invasive neurofeedback. Cardiac patients could have their hearts monitored continuously. Diabetics could be alerted before sugar spikes occurred. But it also opened the door to internal surveillance at an entirely new level. Because the same technology that could track nerve impulses for medicine could be used to track stress, fatigue, anger, or fear in real time. Corporations took notice. A growing number of companies began funding research into biosensor integration for workplace optimization. The stated goal: improving employee wellness and productivity. But the potential for misuse was obvious. What if your stress levels were monitored during salary negotiations? What if fatigue sensors were used to justify termination? What if biometric performance data was fed into AI systems deciding who gets promoted or who gets replaced? In 2019, a leaked patent from a major U.S. defense contractor proposed the use of smart dust for individual behavioral tracking and stress response mapping. The technology wasn't just monitoring, it was analyzing patterns to build psychographic profiles. Combine this with the deployment of facial recognition, RFID badges, and digital productivity software, and the modern workplace becomes a feedback loop of invisible observation. The implications extend beyond employment. Governments also began exploring smart dust for biometric tagging, the ability to mark individuals covertly and track them indefinitely. Unlike traditional tagging methods, such as GPS bracelets or RFID implants, smart dust offers no visible trace. A cloud of sensor motes could be released in a crowd with certain particles designed to adhere only to specific DNA or sweat markers. Once attached, they transmit location data, stress levels, even speech patterns. This kind of surveillance is deniable, persistent, and legally ambiguous, and it creates a new category of tracking: unconsented biometric saturation. Think about public transportation systems, protest gatherings, airport security lines. If smart dust is present and you can't detect it, are you being surveilled? And if so, do you have any legal recourse? So far, the answer is no. There is no regulatory framework specifically governing airborne sensors at the MEMS scale. The FCC, FDA, and EPA all have overlapping jurisdictions, but none has issued specific guidance on smart dust. And there's a reason for that. The deployment is hard to prove. By the time exposure is detected, if ever, the data has already been collected, transmitted, and stored. And in most jurisdictions, sensor data that doesn't identify you by name isn't considered protected. This leaves a dangerous legal loophole. Ubiquitous surveillance without identity becomes invisible surveillance without accountability. The ethical questions are profound. How do you get informed consent from someone who doesn't know they're being observed? How do you opt out of particles that float in the air or sit on your clothing? And if an employer, government, or corporation gathers that data, what rights do you retain? Advocacy groups have begun demanding a right to censor privacy, but the movement remains small, fragmented, and technically outmatched. The sensors are too small, the deployments are too quiet, and the public conversation has barely begun. Most people still don't know smart dust exists. While the United States pioneered smart dust, it didn't stay alone for long. By the late 2010s, academic and government labs around the world had launched their own sensor dust programs, often cloaked in environmental or industrial language. In Japan, Hitachi developed micro RFID tags that measured just 0.15 millimeters square. Originally intended for supply chain management, these tags could be embedded into paper, clothing fibers, or packaging, unnoticeable to the human eye, yet uniquely identifiable and remotely readable. In China, government-backed tech firms began producing ultra-miniature sensors marketed for smart city integration. These sensors tracked air quality, pedestrian density, and traffic flow. But documents leaked in 2020 suggested parallel development of covert moats designed for crowd monitoring and behavioral prediction, particularly during politically sensitive events. Several European research consortiums, funded by the EU's Horizon programs, developed smart dust moats for climate observation. These were meant to be released in forests, oceans, and even into the atmosphere to measure carbon, methane, and particulate pollution. But some models included GPS modules, RF antennas, and even biological sensors. When asked about their potential for surveillance, researchers pointed to environmental monitoring as the primary goal. But as with many dual-use technologies, intent is mutable. A sensor designed to track pollen dispersion could also be used to track a person. And in war zones, the difference between environmental science and tactical advantage often disappears. In 2022, a defense intelligence assessment from NATO noted unusual sensor saturation in parts of Eastern Europe, with unexplained anomalies in radio frequency mapping near military installations. While no nation claimed responsibility, the report hypothesized the use of passive microsensor clouds, smart dust by another name. The sensors may have been deployed via drones, disguised as agricultural sprays or snow dispersants. They were designed not to transmit constantly, but to awaken only when triggered by specific stimuli, magnetic shifts, elevated temperatures, or voice frequency thresholds. In civilian contexts, these same principles are now being applied to smart homes and urban infrastructure. Some modern buildings are embedded with thousands of wireless sensors during construction. They monitor structural stress, humidity, occupancy patterns, and air quality. These are sold as green innovations, designed to save energy and enhance comfort. But when paired with tenant biometrics, Bluetooth metadata, and behavioral profiling software, they become something else: invisible behavioral labs. And the same companies building smart buildings are also building smart cities. Projects like Sidewalk Toronto, Songdo in South Korea, and Neom in Saudi Arabia aim to embed sensors into the very fabric of urban life, tracking water use, foot traffic, retail behavior, and even emotional states through indirect measurement. The danger isn't the data itself. It's the lack of visibility and consent in how it's gathered. Most users never read the fine print. Most citizens have no way to detect when they're surrounded by sensing nodes. And most governments have no oversight mechanisms in place. The story repeats across sectors. In agriculture, smart dust is being developed to monitor soil health, pest activity, and crop growth. These are valid applications. But they also create a pretext for embedding sensors into the food supply chain, raising questions about traceability, commercial surveillance, and market manipulation. In logistics, sensors monitor cargo conditions in real time, but they can also be used to track worker movement, union activity, and shipment anomalies. In retail, moats embedded in store floors or packaging can analyze footpaths, dwell times, and biometric responses to product placement. Each use case seems benign in isolation, but together, they form a system of total environmental sensing, where every action, movement, or physiological change becomes a data point, and you never know it's happening. That's the real power of smart dust. It doesn't require your permission. It doesn't ask. It doesn't even announce its presence. It just observes. Invisible control is the most powerful kind, and smart dust may be its final form. The surveillance tools of the past were bulky, obvious. Cameras had lenses, bugs had wires, satellites had orbits. But smart dust has no face. It doesn't blink or hum. It has no voice to warn you and no presence to challenge. It is built for silence. And that silence is now embedded into the design of modern society. We've entered an era where the line between the digital and physical is dissolving. Our environments, once inert, are now alive with sensing. Walls listen, streets watch, products monitor, and we carry invisible observers on our clothes, in our homes, and even inside our bodies. Smart dust didn't just miniaturize surveillance, it normalized it, because there's no clear point where the innovation ends and the control begins. This raises a question we haven't yet answered. How much transparency do we require when our environments are sentient? Laws haven't caught up. In the United States, there's no federal regulation specifically covering airborne microsensors. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches, but it was written for a world of papers and homes, not molecules and code. Europe's GDPR offers stronger data protections, but even it struggles with non-consensual environmental sensing, and enforcement is nearly impossible. You can't sue a moat. You can't detect one with your phone. And most users will never even know they're being watched. That's the design. That's the danger. Smart dust isn't just a technology. It's a paradigm shift. It redefines what it means to observe, to record, to monitor. And it does so in a way that rewrites consent, replacing opt-in transparency with passive, ambient collection. Which brings us to the final and most haunting implication. What happens when this system scales? Imagine an internet of bodies where every human is a node, every heartbeat logged, every expression categorized, every pattern mined, not for safety or health, but for prediction and control. In such a system, resistance becomes logistical. You can't opt out. You can't shut down what you can't see. And as sensors become cheaper, smaller, and more autonomous, they'll vanish into the background of existence. You'll forget they're there, until they decide you're a threat. It's not paranoia, it's precedent. DARPA funded the research, corporations built the prototypes, governments tested the deployments, and now the infrastructure is here, waiting to be scaled. Welcome to the age of ambient surveillance. You don't get to choose it, it's already here. Welcome to the Forbidden Index.